but I can always talk. So but we want to engage you, and closer on this one. Here, here, here. So think of questions. The other thing we're doing in this, as we move into this section, is to talk more about individual, I'm searching for the word. The word could be cities. The word could be political cultures. The word could be scenes. The word could be neighborhoods. They could be, in China, county districts. There's 16 county districts inside Beijing. And we've analyzed them, for instance. But the general point those all make, I've sometimes put on the board as we have a model like this. We've got these community characteristics. We've got leadership, organized groups, and so forth, bureaucracy, policy outputs. And what we're talking about here is city, context, scene, political culture, neighborhood. That is, how and why do these patterns shift? How and why do they change? And so we want to start with a sort of question, is China different? But we don't want to end there. Max Weber did a book called The Religion of China. Why did he do The Religion of China? I'll ask the Chinese. Then I'll ask the Americans who read the Protestant Ethic when they were in college. When you're in the college, you're reading. Why are you reading a Protestant Ethic, and how does it relate to the religion of China? Or we had someone, we got not here today. Khalid Shah, who's writing in Mumbai. I asked if had he read The Religion of India? No. Max Weber, you're here? Yes. Okay. So, why did Max Weber go to China, or read about China, read about India, read about other countries? He's trying to say, where and why does my analysis work? And what was his analysis he was testing? What was he trying to understand? He's trying to understand development, the same core idea in this course. He sometimes called it capitalism. He sometimes focused on bureaucracy. He talked on the Gothic church as a structure which was not found in other countries of the world. He talked about music, harmony, melody. This is not just making money. And so he says, what is capitalism? It is not hedonism. It's not greed. It's not maximizing income, whatever. Those have been there for centuries before let's say he may have used terms, he didn't quite use the term modern, but let's say before the emergence of these kinds of things from the Middle Ages on, they're different patterns. And so his key idea in the Protestant ethic was what? Yes?
That the Protestants' value of asceticism drives work and consequently drives capitalism.
Yes. Okay. So then why did he, how did he, perfect. So then how did, but maybe he's wrong. Maybe the Protestant ethic is spurious. And maybe it really was, there's more capital in Northwest Europe. So maybe the driver was capital and it wasn't the Protestant ethic at all. So he didn't have the World Values Survey data. He didn't have, 200 nations to play with quantitative. I mean, he would have loved it. I mean, he started coding, he started content analysis of different things. He started lots of kinds of empirical work. But in 1900, 1905, 1918, that was impossible. So what did he do? He used a more classic German scholarly approach, and he went to some key places, key locations. And these included China, because China and India had civilizations thousands of years before the West. So why did you not have a continuous growth and development of China long before the West? When the people in the West, there were Macbeth-type people. There were tribes fighting each other, killing each other off. When the Chinese were civilized and 1,000 years ahead of the Europeans. So why not in China? That was the question he was asking. What was different in China? And what did he answer? Chinese and Indians. We're not going to go in detail. This is a different course, but the logic of thinking this way leads us into why the cities differ. And so we want to use that is why are we studying cities? Some of you want to be mayors, but many of you don't. Many of you want to understand the world. And my general point is, and I started studying cities because they are fruit flies. You can understand the world better by having hundreds and thousands of them that vary instead of only studying 1 or 5 or 8. Okay. So he asked this question, and the people who now do this professionally in later years are sometimes called comparative politics specialists. There's a section, there's a professional association called, I think, comparative. It's not called comparative politics. It's not called politics. It's called something else, like comparative studies or whatever like that. It includes mostly political science, but public administration people, public policy, some sociologists, some geographers. But the idea is comparing all around the world. So geographers should do this, and the geographers have the data, but most geographers don't have much theory. Few. Sociologists are sometimes doing this. Anthropologists, clearly, the idea of young anthropologists is you go to a tribe, and then in the old days you'd go to a tribe that no one else had studied, and you say, here's a brand new. Now they can't do that anymore. Everybody's reading YouTube or watching YouTube on their iPhones in the middle of the jungles of Brazil. Okay, so the anthropologists are coming back and they're studying cities and neighborhoods. And they're called urban anthropologists. And so they all these things are intermingling with each other. But the idea is compare. Because when you compare, as Durkheim said, science begins with comparison. If you don't compare yourself, your city, your neighborhood, you don't know that you're different or not. And so Durkheim's phrase is one. Another way that this got specifically implemented was in a book by two smart people who worked on this stuff for a long time. Henry Tooney and Jaworski? he had a Polish, he worked with a couple of co-authors. Przeworski, Chwarski, I'd say, but he also worked with Ostrowski. I think this was Lstrowski. So if he's Polish, this is I or Y? I. If it's Y, it's Russian. Okay. So Tooney and Ostrowski had a paper, and then Tooney and Przeworski generalized in a book, basically saying, what unit should we study to understand where and why things vary? And sort of asking this kind of question. Should we study nations? Should we study cities? One city, should we compare them? And the answer, one answer they gave was, let's look where and why things vary. So some people, for instance, like, so last time I talked about the concept of political culture initially began with the idea of the national culture, the German culture that the intellectuals created, the French culture around Versailles, and the English who had their, so those were national cultures. However, if you look within France, within Germany, you find differences, big differences. The French, and so I say this because for decades, I did my PhD, I mean, I studied in France, did my PhD in France, lived in Paris for 5 years. I worked and argued with the French for years on this. You have two simple views. The Parisians, who see everything as the same, and Paris dominates the French system, and it's uniform. And the Minister of Culture says, it's 10 o'clock, everybody's reading this book in all the schools of France. Okay. Then you go down and you talk to the mayors, or you have a conference and you bring 5 mayors from around France, and 5 people who are doing other things, and then some Parisians and some academics and some people together. And they talk, and then the Parisians will say, yes, everybody's the same in France. And the mayors say, no, no, no. My city does not do what you say to do in Paris. Okay, and then I'll come back to a Chinese example. About the time, I'll say 10, 15 years ago, the national Chinese government, along with many other governments in the world, were saying, we've gotten too big, we're spending too much money, and we're not responding enough to citizens. And so that the idea that citizens are more legitimate, we need to be responsive to within China. So what did the national, anybody heard me say this? What did the national government say and do at that point? We will fire 1/3 of all national government workers. Trump, this budget, is he saying anything like that? No, Trump is not changing anything compared to what the Chinese did. They fired 1/3 of the whole national government staff. I mean, Trump and the Republicans haven't dreamed of anything like that. Okay. Over a period, I think, of 5 years. So it went into place over 5 years. Okay, about 3 years after the national government did this in China, they then said, it's now time to do the same thing for all provincial and local governments in China. Fire 1/3 of all the staff in the regional and local governments of China. And then what happened? Nothing. We think China is a party-dominated, one coherent system, nation. No. The localities ignored the national government. Okay? So there's more within China and within France. That is, I'm not using American or Australian examples. I'm using the strong case of the French and the Chinese to say there's a lot of local variation in how these things work, including such a basic issue as, thou shalt fire 1/3 of your staff, yes or no? And they said, sorry. Okay. So in that sense, if you talk to the people who are there on the ground making decisions and knowing how to get around the laws in different ways, you get a very different story. This is law, letters, and society. So the law was, thou shalt fire all those workers. What the fact was, the letters in society said, no, and they didn't. Okay? So, so what do we do as analysts or policy advisors or social scientists? First of all, one of their suggestions was, it depends. We don't know at what level a decision may be made. And so these guys, no accident, were from Poland. They were from Poland under communism. They were working on these issues. We had a conference at the time where another guy, not one of these, a younger guy came to one of our conferences in the Netherlands. And he said, oh, you can't compare Poland with these Western and other countries. And we said, why not? Oh, because we have a different system. It's Polish. I said, well, okay, so what does that mean? We have national control of local government, so the local governments cannot control what they do. I mean, it's the national government that makes the decision. So we said, well, how can you measure that? The budget. So what proportion, so what specifically? Well, the percentage of the budget to all local governments that comes from the national government, which is, we asked, well, maybe 60%. So 40% of the budget was raised locally, and 60% was from the national government. Next question, to the poll. What percentage is that in the Netherlands, here in The Hague? We were meeting in The Hague. He said, I don't know. What's the answer? About 90%. Dutch local governments get 90%, got then at least 90% of their money from the national government. Were they more communist than Poland before 1989? Okay, so just knowing the money does not tell you how the decisions are made. Just knowing the law does not tell you how the decisions are made. You need, so and these guys knew that. So they said, then what do we do? So their answer was, let's get data, for instance, on spending. The budget for all of the, and they had about 4 levels of units. So in China, well, you'll use China today because it's bigger. You know, we don't have anybody here from Poland, I guess. Anybody from Poland? No. Okay, so let's use China. So in China, you have the national government. You have provinces. You have cities like Beijing. Underneath that, you have counties or county districts. And underneath that, you have villages. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 levels. Okay, who makes the decisions? What they basically said was, let's look at where and how these things vary. So we worked with people in the Chinese Ministry of Culture, and they were saying, you know, we have a goal of having equal access to public services across China. And so we said, okay, so we have data for libraries, museums, and cultural centers, basically, where they can have plays, they can have music, they can have a variety of things. And where are these distributed? So you can look at budgets, but before we get to that, let's say we've got, so where are these? There are roughly 3,000 of these in China. So we could look at how many of these, so one thing we said, all right, let's look, do these things, these are amenities, do these generate urban development? So we're thinking of the Protestant ethic, we're thinking of the numbers of amenities, we're looking at linkages here. And we found, we had an assistant, and we weren't sure where and how these things were distributed. we're not Chinese, we're Western, so we're learning this stuff. But I'm telling it to you to see how much you do or don't know as well, because these things are not so obvious. We found there are about 3,000 of these across China. So one analysis was, does having a library, a museum, or a cultural center increase, does this lead to more people migrating there, say 30 to 40, 40 to 40, 50, but we had good age cohort changes for Chinese citizens. And then changes in, I think we had some kind of change in rent or I've forgotten what the measure was, but something like income or local GNP, something like that. So we got population and jobs and income kinds of measures. And we did a regression, we found zero impact. If you had more or less of these, zero impact. Does that say culture does not matter in China? No. It says these are distributed equally across China, and that was step one. So just, I don't want to go too far, but if we follow the Polish example as close to what they did, the next question, so the number of these institutions is this. The second question is, how big are their budgets? Because you may have one library, but it may be a big or a small library, and maybe it has a bigger staff. It may have shows. It may have tutors. It may have a variety. So the budget. When we analyzed the budgets, we found the opposite result. So we have if this is the museum in here, this path initially was 0. When we analyzed the number of them, when we looked at so this is the number of these. If we look at the budget, it was positive. So if you had a larger budget for your library or your museum, you had an impact on more people coming to that area and more economic development. Okay. So what this example suggests is looking at the difference between the number and the budget at the local level can give you a different answer. But the more general point remembering Poland is, how much do these, where and why do the budgets change? We have in the room an expert on service delivery in China, Chinese local governments. Any thoughts on how could we answer this question? Where and why do we have variations in, say, hospitals? And how do we analyze it in this kind of a framework? Just a little bit louder so people can hear you on YouTube. Why?
The number change.
So, why and where are there more hospitals? And where and why might the hospitals have more good service to make Chinese citizens more healthy? Where do the hospitals work better or less well? I mean, assuming we have a measure of this.
I think in the southeast of the China.
Okay.
In the rich provinces.
Okay. So your answer is so. You got China, so you say the southeast. Okay.
No, that's southwest.
Sorry, southeast. Okay, sorry. There we go. Southeast. Shows how much of an expert I am. Okay, but you see where I'm going in a second. This is similar to the city name. This is similar to the national name or the city name. So you can say, for instance, in Shanghai it's better, in Beijing it's better, and in a small town, rural town, it may be less good. That's not telling us why. See, Weber's idea is to get more at why and how does it work. So if you only say China's different, Poland's different, the Southeast is different, why is the Southeast different? That's the question. See, that's the harder question to push yourself. What makes the Southeast have better hospitals or better health?
The most important reason is the local government have more budget, have more money.
Okay. Okay. Well, I mean that sometimes that is the whole answer. But even if that is true, the question is, why is it true? Why does the local government succeed in getting more money? See, so over here, so it's I mean, each of these questions in a sense are answers, and questions are right and wrong. That is, we're trying to dig deeper, to push beyond the simpler and to get to more subtle answers. And you've heard me say this quickly in this class, that in the last 20 years, we've got, or say, I've talked about Max Weber. Max Weber had 3 or 4 countries. So he discussed national and local differences. He's a brilliant guy. He saw all kinds of things that others did not. But he did not have these kinds of data. Now we've got tons of data. We've got data for all of it. We've got for many of the provinces, cities, counties, and villages in the southeast, southwest, center, and so forth. Why and how do they vary? We can analyze more subtly. Yes?
I think before 1980, the central government in China controlled all of the resources in the society, including political, social, and economic resources. But after 1980, the local government have more and more power to make decisions and to control resources.
Okay. How do we know how much it changed in 1980, 81, 82, 83, 84, 85? How can we measure that more precisely? I mean, that is, you're probably right, but how do we know how much that explains? How big were the changes? Are there any data? And what data?
Maybe after 1990, because the tax policies have changed.
From what to what?
Tax
Yeah.
policies
Yeah.
have changed.
Right. But what was the new tax?
The local government has more
Autonomy?
Yeah. More income, more taxes.
Okay, no, but there are 2 answers maybe. One is the national government gives more money to the local governments, or they have the autonomy to choose to raise local revenues locally, such as raising a sales tax, a property tax, or other, as are being argued over in the Cook County right now. Should we tax, soda? I mean, so this is a hot issue in Cook County right now. I mean, so I'm asking, was it transfers from the national government, or was it autonomy to decide yourself? Is that clear? Or I mean, I know we have language communication problems, but is my question clear or not? Maybe not. Anybody else from China who wants to discuss these? Try. That is, that I'm used to working with 2, 3, 4 Chinese experts, and often nobody really knows. And so it's not as if there's a right or wrong answer. And so we've gotten new data and new analyses because we're building on this. We've been building on this for over 30 years. We've had this kind of conversation. Yeah.
And the other important reason is there are more private companies developed in
In the southeast.
In southeast.
Okay, so now that's a new variable. See, that's not the region. Private companies could, and so if we're doing a multi-causal model, we could put in private companies. And then we could put in budget, put in tax, or say maybe here we could put in things like, say, come from the national government. We got intergovernmental revenues can be coming in and enhancing these paths. But we don't. I don't want to. Yes, so we want to get to this, but I also want to leave you with one or two clear, simple points as well. That's okay.
In that model, how would we be accounting for gradual regime change as well? Not that there's been any dramatic regime change in the past, like in recent history, but there's also, time and process that counts for some loosening of, government control.
It could be an increase in dollar, yen transfers, yen transfers in money. It could be a change in civil rights, political tolerance. It could be a change so yes, all these things could be fast or slow. So you don't need a revolution to have these things change.
Right. But just like say if we were to try to say, okay, what was the role of these private companies, right? How would you control for it? How would you isolate that effect and control for just
now, in France, for example, when Mitterrand in 1982, I think, became president of France, he formed a government, as I said, in the first class or second class, with the communists. So the communists and the socialists nationalized many private companies in France. And so the whole French labor force went from being 20% government to 40% government in 1 year. It was not a revolution. It was just a change of power at the national. So these things can go up fast or down, or that is. So if you have, using the same kind of numbers which they have, you can have the percentage of the. If we had something like a local GNP, which is private or public, or which is in the service sector or industrial sector or manufacturing. And the Chinese collect a lot of data on that. That is, they've got. The perspective, the official perspective of the Communist Party is the economy drives everything. So they got lots of economic data. We have 2,000. We have over 1,000 variables. We have the number of vending machine repairmen in each county of China, just as an example of how refined the data can be. These are standard Chinese census data. Vending machine repairmen. That's subtle. So you can have, how much are those? So yes, those are okay. But let me. I want to make clear and simply one basic point about levels. How do you deal with where the change is? Is it national? Is it regional? Is it local? Or whatever? And the simple answer, which they basically said, was look for variations. That is, if you have every city in China has let's say one library and their budget is 100 per person, then they all have an identical budget, basically. If they're the provinces, say has 500. If all the provinces are the same, there's no variation from province to province or city to city. But if you then go to the county, and then if you go to the county districts, and you find that these vary from, let's say, 50 to 200 per person, then we say, aha, here is variation. So let me, I'll give you, example. I'm trying to use non-American examples because everybody knows, in a sense, that cities differ and neighborhoods differ in the U.S. But everybody thinks, especially the people who teach and write laws and public administration, public policy in France and China, they think mostly, and they write as if it's a unitary system. And yet, if we look more closely, it's not. So some of these things vary. And so basically what the suggestion was, look for the level at which we have variation. So you can set up, I'm trying not to be, no fancy methodology, but if you have, say, Y, where this is the budget, you can then have X1, X2, X3, you know, bunch of factors, Bn, B3, B2, B1, alpha. And so you do a standard regression equation like that. You could have a measure at the province level, the city level, the district level, the village level, and then see which one has more of an impact. Or you could take the measure, you could take this as your spending at each of these levels and see how much they vary. So that is, you can look at both. You can change the structure of the model. Okay, so you don't need to have any fancy statistics to see that idea. It's to see where and why, at what level do these things change. For example, French example, Montpellier, France, is the fastest growing city in all of France. It's booming. It's in the south. It's near Avignon and Aix, and the south is now booming in France. Paris and the north of France is in general decline of jobs and population in the last 20 or 30 years. These cities in the south are increasing a lot, and they're increasing with younger, more highly educated people who are starting new firms and who are doing new and different things, and people are moving there. It's a little bit like the Sun Belt or the southeastern England, and in that sense. But just when I visited, I said, you know, what are they doing in Montpellier? I mean, I've never been to Montpellier before. I've never paid attention to it. It's a wild, it's a classic socialist city. The streets have the names of the great socialist political leaders of France. They have a huge library. They've got an amazing trolley system, tramways. They've got all sorts of beautiful socialist created material, high tech, and other kinds of things. 1, 2, they have the biggest dance festival, I think, in the world. These other cities in the south have theater festivals, music festivals. They said, well, what can we do that's different? So it's a dance. So they have a dance festival. It will last maybe 6 weeks, and then they have maybe 300,000 people who come there for the dance festival. Okay, so I'm making the simple point that you have some of these individual cities that are doing lots of things. You go 1 city away, 2 cities away, and you talk to the mayors and look at the budgets of those cities, and they're doing nothing. They have no festivals. They have no fancy infrastructure. They're very low spending, low budget, low service cities, and this is France. This is not what they tell you in Paris. They say it's the same everywhere, but you look closely and look at data like this for France or for China, and there's a lot of local variation. Okay. But Durkheim said, this is the beginning of an explanation, and we can then try to see why, you know, what's going on. And so we're talking of the southeast. You're from Guangdong? You want to mention, we had this conversation in emails about a month or so ago. What did we talk about as possible explanations, for instance, for Guangdong? Just tell them briefly about Guangdong and why might it be different from the rest of China.
Development of the city?
Yeah.
Because historically, in a certain period, it was the only cities that was allowed to trade with other countries. So.
But that started when?
Maybe like Qing Dynasty.
Well, roughly what year?
About maybe it's
how many hundred years ago?
Maybe the 19th century.
Okay, so 19th century.
Yes.
So a long time before Mao is the point.
A long time before Mao.
Okay.
Yes. So yes.
But then under Mao were there changes as well. That is it's an open trading, external oriented And so, I mean, so I'm just asking you to repeat what might be 5 different factors that could have caused this today? That's the interesting question. What might be, that is, what are possible reasonable factors that you and I are not sure how to choose them? So one is history in a sense, or tradition. Related to sort of openness, a spirit of openness, which might be related to proximity to the ocean. So it's easier to have trade through ocean contact. But also, was it on the Silk Road, or communication over land to go to other countries?
Maybe not over land, but through the sea.
Okay, so through the sea. Well, what else? What might be other factors?
Another factor may be our economic reform in the 1980s.
Okay.
Because back to then there were a few cities that were allowed to have very special economic settings, and very important one was located in Guangdong, in Shenzhen. It's very close to Hong Kong. Yeah, and that's the first fast growing cities.
Okay, so another idea then which that suggests is that in those years after 1945, it was proximity to Hong Kong. And so the competition with Hong Kong might have been effective. But what else?
Maybe the population that's led by the other
Okay,
factors.
so the point is, we can make a list of 5, 6, 7. I'll tell you just one more which amazed me. I can't remember how many years ago this was, maybe 25 years ago. I had a group call me up from UIC which said, I'm hosting a delegation of Chinese. Can you come and talk with them a couple of times and maybe have dinner with them? I said, fine, so I went. There were maybe 80, 100 of them. They were all about 35 to 45 years old, smart young men, young middle-aged men, and chosen from all over China. These were up-and-coming policemen. They came here to Chicago for, I think, 6 months. They had internships in the Chicago Police Department. They had courses at UIC. They had visitors like me who came and talked with them, and so forth. Why were they here? They were preparing to become the police leaders of Hong Kong after Hong Kong became part of China. So, who would have imagined? So if you look today at why and how is police delivery, that is, we have this Hong Kong protests and demonstrations in the last 1 year or so, big stuff. It's in all the news. The police, the Hong Kong Chinese police, are also handling it in a very delicate way. They're not just coming in and arresting. It is not a Tiananmen Square. They're not coming in with guns or tanks or whatever. It's I think for something like 1 month, the police just said, demonstrate if you want. Okay, so my simple point is service delivery is subtle, and if we try to explain why and how it emerged, one factor is the training of the staff. And I would never have thought of suggesting that except because the Chinese did it, and I happened to see it sitting here in Chicago. And this training was going on maybe 3 to 5 years before Hong Kong was merged with the rest of China. So people think longer term in China than not always, but sometimes in this example. All right. Okay. So what we're talking about, or the bigger theme we're talking about in multiple ways, is where and why do these variations come in? How can we explain them? That is, so you hear us. We can think through some examples that other people may have talked about: tradition, geography, climate, transportation, access, and so forth. But then how can we test them? How can we assess the evidence? And what I'm getting at here is if you get data at the village, the county, the city, these levels, and you can see at what level are there variations. And if you find that the only variation is at the county at one level, then you can say, aha, let's focus on the people who are making those decisions at that one level, and not try to say it's at the province or the city or the village. It's really the county district level. But similarly, what then has happened? Let me throw in one more example of what has happened in the U.S. and around the world since the two big dates I've talked about repeatedly in this verse, 1968 and 1989. What's happened everywhere since 1968 and 1989? A few places have had, quasi-revolutions. In Paris, de Gaulle resigned. But you certainly had demonstrations. But what were the demonstrations for? What did they want? Basically,
In which countries?
all of these countries.
Like the end of authoritarian.
Yes, they wanted the government to be less authoritarian, and they wanted the citizens to be more important. So citizens have been getting more important all around the world in the last 20, 30 years. Okay, how can we measure that? How might that change what's going on here? That is, we should be able to put in citizen community, including citizen characteristics. For instance, if the educational level of the citizens is higher, does that increase the use of the libraries, and does that in turn increase the GNP? I mean, that's the Gary Becker human capital argument. That if people get more educated, they'll have more human capital. Even if they have the same money, the same technology, they'll use it more creatively if they're more educated. Okay, so the point is, this is a framework that I'm not trying to, as I said, I'm not trying to teach you statistics at all. I'm trying to have you think, how can you set up a research design, even if you never do this, even if you're a lawyer that is an old-fashioned style lawyer, that is, in 20 years lawyers may be running regressions using this stuff. You'd be running regressions on a cell phone, just by talking, whatever. Okay, but before you can run a meaningful regression, you've got to frame the issues in terms of a research design, and thinking about how you and so that's what this essentially does in very simple terms. It says get data at each of these levels, and now this is getting easier and easier. You're in an MA program called what?
Computational social science.
Okay, and one of its big computational social science. It's a brand new program. James Evans has started, and he started it in part, and Luke Ansling is a new professor of sociology and computer science. These two guys are doing lots of new stuff. And one of the things which is new with them is big data. We've got tons of data we did not have 5 years ago. And you can download tons of stuff from the internet now. And you can download Twitter tweets. So we had Ben Picker in a class last year. He's an economics student in a college. He said, yeah, I downloaded 750,000 tweets from all the city council members in New York, Chicago, and LA, and it took me 15 minutes. 15 minutes. I mean, in the old days, you'd have 20